Guys, in this video, we are going to learn how to code the Translator app that can translate any kind of text that we are going to type in this window into any language that you want. So as of now, I'm just converting the English text to Hindi, but you can change the languages as you want. So let's try and see how this application works. So if I type something here and click on translate, so this is going to give me the translation of this text from English to Hindi. So in this project, we are going to be using a Google Translate API, and this is going to be a full stack project where we will be building this front-end application in React JS, and we will be integrating Google Translate API into our Node.js backend. So this is going to be a very interesting project. Stay tuned till the end of the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so. So guys, before we start building this application, we are going to need access to Google Translate API. So before we start building this application, let's search for Google Translate in the browser. So here you can see that Google has their own translator where you can type any text and it will convert this text to whatever language you want. So we are going to be using the same API that Google is using on this translator. So before we start integrating the Google Translate API, we have to go and generate the API key on Google Cloud Console. So I'm just going to search for Google Cloud Console in the browser. So if we go to the first link here, so I can click on go to console. I'm already logged in with my email ID here. If you don't have an account on Google Cloud Console, you can probably sign up using your Gmail. And once you click on the console, this will take you to the dashboard, that is a Google Cloud Console dashboard. So to get an access to Google Translate API, you can click on the projects here and create a new project. I already have some projects here, so I'm just going to continue with my default project here. So once you have created a project, you can search for credentials in this Google Cloud Console dashboard, and here you should be able to search credentials. So once you click on credentials, you will land on this new dashboard, that is API and services. So here in enabled API and services, if I search for translate, you can see that I already have this API enabled in my project, Cloud Translation API. If you do not have this API enabled, you can click on enable API and services and search for Cloud Translation API. So once you search for Cloud Translation API, so if you click on that, so here I see the button manage, but if the API is not enabled in your application, then you will be able to see the enable API button here. You can click on that and it will enable the API in your project. So once you have enabled the API, you can go back to the credentials dashboard, and here under the credentials, you can create credentials and API key. So this will give you the API key that we need to use for the project. So when you try to create the API key, it will also ask you to set up the billing in your project. I already have a billing setup in this project. So if you don't have a billing account setup, you can go to the billing account management, and here under the payment settings, you should be able to add your card details and set up billing for this account. So without setting up the billing account, you won't be able to create API key in this project. Now let's talk about pricing for this Cloud Translation API. Let's open a new tab and search for Cloud Translation API pricing. So this will take me to the documentation of pricing for Cloud Translation API, and if I open this tab, here I can see the different versions of Cloud Translation API. So in this project, I'll be using the version 2, and you can see in the pricing that this API is completely free to use until 500,000 characters per month. So you will be able to use this API for free as long as you don't exceed the character limit per month. But even to use free API, you still have to set up your billing account. Without setting up your billing account, you won't be able to create the API key here under the credentials. So when you try to create the API key, it may also ask you to fill this simple form here, that is auth consent screen. I have already filled this form, but it's very easy to fill. I can show you the things that you need to fill here. So here I have already filled it, so I can see the button to edit the app, but you'll just see the form here. So if I click on edit app, so here you just have to fill the name, your email address, and you can leave everything blank. You can leave all this blank. I have provided the domain here, but you can actually leave it blank and save and continue. So here you have to fill the email address again. Let me just fill my email address, save and continue. And here under the scopes, you can leave everything blank and go directly to the next next page, save and continue. So you can basically leave everything blank, just fill the name of your app and the email address, and you can submit this form. After submitting this form and after setting up the billing account, you should be able to create the API key here under the credentials. So now we know how to create the API key. In the next step, we are going to build a backend application in Node.js. So let's go to the Visual Studio Code and start integrating this API into our Node.js application. So guys, here I am in my Visual Studio Code. I have a new folder open here. To start a Node.js project, I'm just going to initialize this folder by running a command npm init, and I'm just going to leave all the details here as default. So this is going to create a package.json file in our application. So I'm also just going to install some packages that I'm going to need in this Node.js application. So we are going to install some packages. One of them is going to be Express Server, and we are also going to need some middlewares like course, body parser, and we are going to be using a nodemon to run the server. So I'm just going to install 4 packages here and hit enter. So I think all the packages that we are going to need are installed in this project. So I'm just going to create a new file here that is going to be our root file, that is server.mjs, and here in the package.json, I'm just going to add a start script to start this application. And here in the start script, we are going to be using nodemon server.mjs. Let's save this, and here in the terminal, let's run a command npm start to start this application. Now let's go to server.mjs and let's set up a basic Express server here. So I'm just going to say here import Express from Express, and we are going to make some other imports as well. For example, import course from course. We are also going to import body parser, and here by using an Express module, I'm just going to create a new app that is going to be Express app, and this app will be using 2 middlewares. One of them is going to be course, and this is also going to use another middleware that is body parser.json, and this app is going to be listening on port 3001, and when it is successfully starting the server, we can say console log server is running. So let's save this and see if our application is working fine. So here in the terminal, I can see server is running fine. So that's our basic Node.js application setup. And this is the point where we can start integrating Google Translate API into this Node.js application. So guys, to start integrating the Google Translate API in this Node.js application, I'm just going to install 2 more packages that we are going to need. So one of the package that we are going to need to make API calls is Axios, and we are also going to need .env package in this project to save our environment variables. So now we have these 2 packages installed. I can go and create a new file here that is going to be .env, and here in my .env, I'm just going to paste my API key, which I'm not going to share in the video. So you can bring your own API key from Google Cloud Console and put it here. So once you have API key in your .env file, so here in the project, you can import .env from .env package, and here in the app we can mention .env.config. So this will help us read the API key from .env file. So now we have the API key, and now let's go to the documentation and see how we can use the Cloud Translation API. So I'm just going to open a new tab and search for Cloud Translation API. So the first link here is going to take me to the documentation of Cloud Translation API. So here on the sidebar, you can see that there are different versions of this API. We are going to be using a free version, that is a basic version. Here under the basic, I can click on translate. So that's the API we are going to be using. This is a translation API. So that's the root URL that we are going to be calling to get the translation from Google Translate API, and it's going to accept some parameters here. So that's the entire documentation. You can read more into it, and let's now just go to the Node.js application and make a call to this API. So I'll just copy this link, and in my Node.js application, I'm just going to write some logic to make a call that is going to be axios.post, and we are going to be making a call to this URL, and we are going to be passing some parameters here. So one of the parameter that we have to pass is our API key that we got from the Google Cloud Console. So here I can pass API key as a parameter, and this is going to be process.env.api_key. So this will be coming from my .env file, and the next parameter that I'm going to be passing in this API is going to be the text that I want to translate. Let's say that I'm just going to try and translate hello world into some another language. And the third parameter that we are going to pass is a target, and the target is going to be the language in which we want to translate this text. So if I just go back to the documentation, so here you can see that there is a target parameter and there is an entire documentation for it. If I click on the language support here, so here you will be able to find the different codes for the different languages, because in this application I'm just going to be converting my text to Hindi language. So I'm just going to be using this code here. So I'll copy this code from here and pass it in my target. If you want to use this API to translate to some other language, you can find the code here to that language and change it here under the target. So now we have the URL ready that we are going to call. So we see some error here in the terminal because Axios is not defined in the application. So I'm just going to import Axios from Axios, and I can say let my translation is equal to await. So it's just going to await the API call, and after we have a response from the API, I'm just going to console log my translation dot data. So here in the terminal you can see that we are getting some response from the API, and if I just try to console log the response dot data dot translations and try to run this again, so here you can see that it's translating the text into different language, that is Hindi. So I'm just going to change the text here. Let me try and translate the text, how are you, in Hindi. So here you can see that it's translating in Hindi. So now we know that our API is working fine and it's translating whatever text is being passed to this translation. So I'm just going to create a post endpoint here, and this post endpoint is going to receive request response variable, and I'm just going to cut and move this logic inside my post endpoint. This is going to be the async function here. And now that we have the translation, so here I'm just going to say respond my translation back to my front end. So I'm just going to say response.json, whatever translation I'm getting from the API, we are going to respond it back to the front end. So as of now in this post endpoint, we have hard coded the text that we are trying to translate, that is how are you. But here I'm just going to make it dynamic. I'm just going to be receiving this text from my front end. So I can say request dot body dot text. So it's going to be receiving a parameter text from the front end, and whatever we are receiving is just going to convert that text into the target language and respond it back to the front end. So I think our backend application is ready now. Now let's go to the front end. We are going to build a new React application and try to use this endpoint into a React application to build the interface. So as here I have a new React application that's running on my local host 3000, and this is where we are going to build our translator app using our backend API. Before we start building this application, let's install all the required packages that we are going to need in this application. To build a basic layout, I'm going to be using Material UI in this application. So I'm just going to search for Material UI install, and I'll go to the first link here, and I should be able to find the command that I need to install Material UI in this application. So I'll copy this, go back to my Visual Studio Code. So that's where my new React application is running. So here I'm just going to open a new terminal and run this command to install Material UI in this application. So now Material UI has been installed. We are also going to need one more package, that is Axios, to make a call to our backend application and get the translation back into our front end. So I'm just going to install Axios in this project. So now we have all the packages that we are going to need in this application. I'm just going to make some imports here. I'm going to import Axios from Axios, and we are going to be using a text field from Material UI to build the input fields where we are going to enter our text for the translation. So I'm just going to import text field from Material UI. So to start building this application, I can just remove all the default code that we have here, and we can also remove the class name here, and now we have a blank application and we can start building it from scratch. So here on the main div container, I'm just going to put some styling here, and I'm just going to make the display as flex on my main div container. I'm just going to give it a height of 100 VH, and we are going to justify all the content that we are going to put under this div tag to center. Let's align the CSS here so we can see clearly on the screen, and then we are also going to align all the items to center. And the flex direction for the main container is going to be column, and we are going to give it a gap of 1% between all the items that we are going to place within this div container. So that's all the CSS we are going to need on the main container. So under the main container, first we are going to add a h1 tag which is going to say Translator App. So let me save this, go back to my application and see how it's looking on the front end. So here in the application, as of now, we just have a text saying Translator App, and we are going to add two text fields here using Material UI, and they are going to appear below this text. So from Material UI, we are going to use some component to add a text field, and that is going to be this text field component. And here I'll try and search for multi-line text field. That is the component that we are going to use in this application, a component like this where we can enter a lot of text. So let's show the code here, and here I'm just going to try and copy my multi-line text field, go back to my application, and here after my h1 tag, I'm just going to create one more div tag and place my multi-line text field inside this div tag. So let's save this and see how it's looking on the front end. So here we have a multi-line text field, but this is looking small. We need a much more wider multi-line text field to enter more text. So here on the multi-line text field, I'm just going to say that minimum rows in my text field should be 10. So if I do that, it's just going to expand here at the bottom, and I'm just going to give it a width of 500 pixels. So let's give it a width of 500 pixels. So this multi-line text field is going to expand, so we have a lot of room to enter a lot of text for translation here. I'm just going to add one more multi-line text field here on the side. So let's go back and copy this multi-line text field and create one more. Now if I go back to my application, now we have two text fields here, and we will try and put some gap between these text fields. So if I go back here on the div tag, I can put some style tag here on the container that is containing these two text fields. So here I will say display is going to be flex and the gap is going to be 1%. So if I do that, it's just going to create a gap between the two text fields. And here at the bottom, I'm just going to put a button that is going to be a translate button. And when somebody is going to click on the button, it's just going to translate the text to whatever language we want, from English to Hindi. So let's create a button here. I'm just going to import button here at the top. Let's import it. And here at the bottom, after my text fields, I'm just going to enter the button. And this button is going to have variant is equal to contained. I'm also going to put some styling on this button. I'm just going to make the background color on this button to be black. And this button is going to have a text that is going to be translate. So if I save this, go back to my application, now we have a basic layout ready. Let's change the labels on these two text fields. As of now, the label says multi-line. So I'll just try and change this label. So on my first text field, I'm just going to say this is going to be English, because we are going to be entering English text here. And this is going to be Hindi, and that's the language it's going to be translated into. So if I go back and look at my application, now my basic layout is ready in this React application. So in the next step, we are just going to put some event listeners on this text field and the button. So guys, before we implement the event listeners on the button and the text field, I'm just going to create two state variables in the application. So let's create a state variable that is going to be text and set text. This is going to be using use state, and the initial value on this state variable can be empty. And we are also going to create a second variable that is going to be translation and set translation, and this is going to be again empty in the beginning. So we got the two state variables in this application. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to assign the value to my text fields. My first text field is going to have a value that is going to be text, and my second text field is going to have a value that is the second variable translation. So on my first text field, I'm just going to put a on change function here. So here I can say that on change, whenever on change is going to be fired, I'm just going to set my text to event.target.value. So basically, when somebody is typing into this text field, we are going to save this into our state variable that is text. And we are also going to put an event listener on our button that is going to be a on click event listener. On click, we are just going to call a function that is going to be handle click, and we can define this handle click function here above the return statement. So here in the handle click, I can define a new function. So in this function, basically we are going to be making a call to our backend API, and we are going to be passing this text to our backend API. So my backend API is still running on localhost 3001. So here I'm just going to make a call to my backend API using Axios. So I'm just going to say let my translation, and I'm just going to make this handle click function as a async function. And here we are saying that let translation is equal to axios.post. And here we are making a call to the backend, and on the backend we are making a call to /translate endpoint, and we are passing text as a body in this call. And here at the bottom we can console log translation. Now if I go back to my backend, So my backend application is still running. So here we have created a post endpoint. I'm just going to make a minor change in this post endpoint. This is going to be /translate, and I'm just going to save this. Now let's go back to the front end application. So here we have a handle click function, and this is going to make a call to /translate and console log the response from the backend API. I'm just going to console log translation.data. So let's go to the front end now. So here I'm just going to inspect it, go to the console, and let's make a call by putting some text here, and I'm just going to hit on translate. So we can see that we are getting a response from the API, and this response is having a translated text. And if we look at our backend, so we can see that we are also receiving a call on the backend. The same text is being logged here because we are also logging the translation here. So that means our API is working perfectly fine. So we got the translated text here. So I'm just going to save this translation to my translation state variable. So here what I can say is set my translation, which is a state variable here. I'm just going to set the response from the API in the translation variable by using translation.data, and we are going to access the first element in the array dot translated text. So if I save this, go back to my application. So if I hit translate again, now you can see that I'm able to see my translated text here after I call the API. Let me refresh the application. So I'm just going to put some text here and hit translate, and I'm able to see my translation here. Let's try some other text here. Let's try to translate something else. So I'm just going to enter another text here and try to translate again. So we can see that our translator is working perfectly fine, and we are receiving all the calls on the backend. We are able to see all the logs here. We are receiving the text here. So our translator app is working fine. That's all I wanted to cover in this video. So if you found a value in this video, leave a like on this project and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.